Pakistan is facing its worst economic crisis in years. Runaway inflation and low foreign exchange reserves are contributing to the misery, factors that led to Sri Lanka's meltdown last year. Though Pakistan's not there yet, it's teetering on the edge. Queues like this one are becoming the norm. People wait in line for hours to get subsidized flour, a staple in Pakistan. Many simply can't afford the usual foodstuffs to feed their families, which is why Pakistan is hoping to unlock more than $1 billion in funding from the International Monetary Fund or the IMF. But here's how Pakistan's economic crisis is directly affecting its people.
I have to queue up for 2 or 3 hours in line to purchase subsidised flour. The regular prices are unaffordable. Inflation has gone crazy. Prices are increasing and the situation in the country is getting worse. There is no electricity, but we get bills. There is not gas, but we get large bills.
We were able to buy groceries for 1,000 rupees, but now we can only buy a few things with that same amount.
To drive home just how much of a sticker shock people are experiencing, let's take a look at just onions. Now, it's a staple of the South Asian diet, cheap and tasty, and a core ingredient for most dishes. Over the past year in Pakistan, the price of onions has increased over 500%. Let's get more context on this. I'm joined by DW reporter Binish Javed in the studio. Binish, welcome. What does this singular increase in the price of onions say about Pakistan's economic crisis?
Biresh, the economic crisis is hitting people where they feel it. Pakistanis use onions, for instance, for their omelets in breakfast, for their curries in lunch and for dinners, for their salads. And even the poorest of the poor who can't afford to eat anything, even they will have a piece of onion with a piece of bread. So onion is something that's extremely important for Pakistani's food. And imagine a daily wage earner who earns less than €5 a day. Now he has to pay almost €1 for a kilo of onions. And before the crisis had hit, people in Pakistan could buy onions for less than €0.25. I've spoken to women in Pakistan and they say they have no option but to find ways to cook without onion. And onion is something that poor families in Pakistan would use to increase the quantities of curries so that everyone will have food on their plates. But unfortunately, just the increase in price of onions has badly impacted and disturbed the budget of an average household in Pakistan.
As you're saying, it's not just about onions. I mean, the entire groceries budget has been impacted. We spoke to a woman in Karachi, a housewife, in fact, and this is what she had to say to us.
The price of vegetables and fruits has gone up. Now we spend the same amount of money on vegetables for only 2 days that we used to spend on vegetables for 10 days. Especially the prices for onions and tomatoes has gone really high. It's completely disrupted our budget.
Again, the budget is what you were talking about, Binish. I mean, this rearrangement rather, of the budget must essentially sound a death knell for middle-class families and their plans, and particularly for poorer families. This must be catastrophic.
Biresh, yes. So middle class is definitely shrinking. They are badly impacted. But the poor of the country has been have been badly hit. So, for instance, Pakistan is also a country we have to remember that just last year it was hit by catastrophic floods, and those floods impacted mostly the poor families of the country. Almost 33 million people were impacted. Around 8 million people were displaced, and even now, millions are without homes. And these families from rural areas of Pakistan, before floods, at least they were self-sufficient. They had their own agriculture land, they had their own mud houses, so they were able to sustain themselves. But now their agriculture land is underwater, their homes have been perished, and the UN says Pakistan already has more than 30% people who live below poverty line, and now UN says that unless rehabilitation efforts are not made, recovery efforts are not made, an additional 9 million Pakistanis could be pushed into poverty. So yes, definitely floods impacted, but the current economic crisis has worsened the situation for poor of the country.
So the poor could become poorer. The price of onions is gone up. It is unaffordable for poor families in particular. There's a shortage of wheat, again, impacting poor families. And the price of fuel has also gone up. I mean, it just sounds like doom and gloom. I wonder how Pakistanis are reacting to this.
So in last couple of days, I've spoken to some political commentators in the country. I've spoken to common people in the country, and I have never seen such pessimism before. It seems like there is no trust on the government, and there is a consensus among people that all politicians are looking for is their own political gain, and they do not care for their own country, and they believe that the political crisis of the country has worsened the economic crisis. Last year, when Imran Khan's government was ousted through a no-confidence vote, he has been out on the streets protesting against the government, demanding an early election, and the current government was also not able to take decisions, not able to make choices that stabilize the economy. And when you look at the people, there are people who can't afford rents anymore. People are forced to take out their children from expensive school and send them to cheaper schools. They are unable to export transportation. So there are people who are selling their cars and buying motorbikes because they cannot afford fuel. So people of Pakistan, especially middle class, are impacted, and it seems most people now think that there is no one taking responsibility, and people are just left on their own.
And the government's response has been to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, for funds. And you had Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif comment on that last week, and this is what he said, and I quote, "Our economic challenges at the moment are unimaginable. The IMF conditions which we have to fulfill are beyond the imagination, but we don't have any other option." Back to you, Binish. Why doesn't Pakistan have any other option? How did it come to this? What has caused this particular crisis?
So IMF says, and also the current government says, that the crisis started when previous government of Pakistan and Imran Khan, the then Prime Minister, made a decision of subsidizing fuel, electricity and gas. And they say that it was a political decision to gain public support. But that meant that Pakistan was getting less money for power than it was supposed to get. And when the new government came, they also didn't want to lose public support, so they also didn't reduce the prices. They also didn't cut down the subsidies on fuel products. And the current government also overvalued the currency, which meant that remittances, which are a big part of Pakistan's national income, now overseas Pakistanis were sending these remittances through private means and not through banks. So that money was not shown in Pakistani accounts. Eventually, when Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves depleted, the government then had to go to the IMF. By the way, the IMF program was stalled when Imran Khan when Imran Khan subsidized the fuel products. And since then, now the government is negotiating with the IMF. In September, it got one payment. Now it is expecting another payment. But not only this, I think flooding also played a role in the crisis. Billions of Pakistan had damages in billions of dollars, and also the Ukraine war. Pakistan imports a lot of its wheat from Ukraine, and when the Ukraine war happened, a lot of wheat couldn't come to Pakistan. There was a shortage, and that also caused food crisis in the country.
Perfect storm, but populism way up there as an initial factor. The help from the IMF, will this come at a cost for Pakistan?
I think it will come at a huge cost. We just heard people of Pakistan saying how their lives have been impacted. I think, unfortunately, their situation will get worse because IMF is asking Pakistan to increase its tax base. And the rich always finds their own way of not paying the taxes.
Right.
And the easiest way for the government would be to impose tax on consumer products, which means that the cost of living will increase because price of every item, every
Right.
daily item would increase. And then IMF is also asking that subsidies on fuel products be decreased, which means that the transportation cost will increase,
Right.
cost of using electricity in a household will increase, cost of heating up your homes or just using your stove will increase. And at the macro level, I think industries will shrink because
Right.
cost of production will increase, per capita, eventually per capita income of the country will decrease. Economic growth of the country will decrease.
Right.
So in the current scenario, a payment by IMF is a very good news because Pakistan has absolutely no money left. But for the people of Pakistan, it's a bad news.
Very briefly, this is not the first time that Pakistan is going to get an IMF loan program. It's had, I think, more than 20 so far. Why does this keep happening?
I think the core of the problem is poor governance. Economists say Pakistan have not been able to have a fiscal discipline. So its imports are always higher than in its exports. There were not enough efforts made to increase the exports of the country.
Right.
There has not been a lot of investment made in the small and medium enterprise, which is the backbone of the economy. Power structure of the country is obsolete. State entities like railways and the international airline, they incur billion in losses. Pakistan needs to diversify its energy sources. It imports most of its energy.
Right.
So fundamental, actually a overhauling of the system is required, which Pakistan has failed to do.
A complete reset. Binish, thanks very much for breaking this complex issue down in very simple words.